Well, good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on which side of the Rockies you are right now. Welcome to this month's edition of On Track Live. Appreciate everybody chiming in. Got a great guest today. Get to his introduction here in just a minute. Just wanted to give an update on a couple of items before we get started. And also remind everybody that we do record these sessions. We've noticed a lot of folks are starting to use this more like a podcast where they can check in on their schedule and watch the recording. So if you're ever not able to make it at the appointed hour, we do have the recordings available for you to go from here. It's a dynamic time, things going on right now. This is very topical for our discussion today with our representative here from NERC. I presented on behalf of NCTA to the coal users group at PowerGen last week, where we talked about the number of coal plants who's had retirement dates announced that are being delayed. If any of the NCTA members want to see a copy of that presentation, feel free to shoot me an email. I'd be happy to share it with you. Email address is Wardo, W-A-R-D-O, wardo@wardo.com. I'll also be giving a similar presentation in 2 weeks at the Rail Equipment Finance Conference, where they annually invite NCTA to come down and give the coal market update. So again, if anybody would like to see those slides, we got kind of a nice table where we're starting to compile a list of the plants that had previously announced coal closures that have now been delayed or deferred to a later date or deferred indefinitely for some of them. So we're tracking that closely. Also want to make sure everyone is aware of the upcoming spring and O&M conferences coming up in May. I'm sure you're seeing it in the On Track and seeing it with the emails that are going out. The addition we've got this year is the day prior to the O&M and spring conferences kicking off concurrently. On that Monday, the day prior, May 19th, we're cooperating with Comtrex to put on a day-long rail shipper 101 conference. It's a basic 101 rail shipper, everything you need to know. For those of you who are working on succession planning, I know a lot of our members are going through retirements now. A lot of folks going through retirements now, a lot of new people moving into positions. This is a day-long course that is set up to provide the basic education you need for fleet management and other issues like that. And let's see here. Before I leave the general announcements, thanks, Steve. Steve just shared a friendly neighborhood announcements for the folks over at Opus McCloskey. Severe flooding prompts force majeure at the USEC terminal. So those of you who are shipping out of there, check the chat box here. Steve has kindly provided us with a link. So if you're engaged at the USEC terminal, please open your chat box and take a click on the link that Steve just shared for breaking news. Thank you, Steve, for sharing that. So with those announcements, again, PowerPoint deck on recent changes in the coal market available through NCTA. Don't forget to sign up you or your colleagues for Rail Shipper 101 on May 19th. And then while you're with us in San Antonio, stick around for the spring and O&M conferences that will run concurrently this year and provide a lot of enhanced networking opportunities by having both conferences at the same time. So with shameless self-promotion over, let me introduce our speaker. Mark Olson is Manager of Reliability Assessments for the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC. The long-term and seasonal reliability assessments that NERC produces are widely used by industry regulators and energy policymakers for informing decisions about current and future adequacy and reliability of the North American electricity grid. Since joining NERC in 2012, Mark has led several projects for developing reliability standards to reduce operating, cyber, and physical security risks to the North American bulk power system. Before he joined NERC, Mark was a career officer in the U.S. Navy, Thank you for your service, Mark. He has a master's degree in electrical engineering from the Naval Postgraduate School and a bachelor's degree from the U.S. Naval Academy. He also holds a professional engineer license in the state of Georgia. So very, very lucky to have with us today the guy who's behind the long-term and winter reliability assessments that he's now going to give us a presentation on. If you have questions as we go, I encourage you to type those in the chat box. I'll keep an eye on that. And then we'll also have a Q&A session at the end of Mark's presentation here. So with that, Mark, again, thank you so much for making the time to be with us today, and I'll kick it off to you to walk us through your slide deck.
Well, thank you, Wardo. I appreciate this opportunity. It's really good to be on Track Live and really be talking with a group that is so important to the well-being of North America. You play a vital role in supplying the fuel that makes our electricity system work. And there are 400 million North Americans that depend on this system for their way of life. So we take this work very seriously, and as we produce a long-term reliability assessment and a summer and a winter assessment every year, I really look forward to going out and talking with all the players who have a role in the reliability, and your group is certainly very high on that list. Particularly on time, we're reminded of that in a winter day like this, where more than half of the bulk power systems footprint here in North America is getting ready or is already experiencing some of the coldest temperatures of the winter, which along with that, they're going to see some of the highest electricity demand that they'll see all year long. And the generators that supply the electricity are facing some of the harshest environments that they operate in. So really great to be here, and I appreciate your interest in the work that we're doing at NERC in our reliability assessment space. I'm going to talk about our long-term assessment and our winter reliability assessment today, and look forward to any questions you have, but I hope to break this down in a way that is understandable so that you can see how we come about these, as well as understand really the tremendous challenges that we're seeing on the horizon here in North America. The long-term reliability assessment we produce every year at about the December timeframe, and we released our 2024 assessment just before the holiday break. And it's been getting a lot of interest despite the poor timing of being released at such a time of year when many other things are going on. With this assessment, we are looking out over the 10-year horizon at primarily the adequacy of the system, the ability for our generation resources to meet the projections of demand over that period. Also, some of the transmission adequacy, how well is the transmission system capable of delivering from the supply to the load centers. We think our assessment is really important and valuable for a number of reasons. One, this is not a simulation game. We are not baking in a lot of assumptions and guesses about what the future looks like. Rather, we really rely and we bring together the demand and generation forecasts from this diverse industry. There are the load forecasters at work in all of the 20 assessment areas that we see here on this map are stitched together by experts in the industry to bring some understanding to where demand is headed and what the supply, the new generation and the existing generation are expected to do. So this is basically how the system is planned, and we're relying on the industry's demand and generation forecasts to do that without a lot of assumptions that frankly change over time. Another reason this is valuable is that it gets extensive review by industry experts We do this by working with each regional entity that is part of the Electric Reliability Organization, but also working with the industry experts, the planners and the operators of the bulk power system at the ISO RTOs and at the vertically integrated utility levels. We're at NERC, we're able to bring them together through a technical committee structure and get extensive review of our work. And also we have a peer review process in developing our report, where the ISO RTOs in one area are looking at the work of the ISO RTOs in other areas, asking hard questions about the complex assumptions and methods that go into their work, and really bringing a level of technical rigor that is difficult to come by in a diverse industry such as we have. A third reason I think our work is really valuable in providing stakeholders with the signposts that they need to understand reliability is that we're not looking just at normal conditions, but we also do examine for what more extreme weather and projections, weather conditions and other projections can do on electric reliability. So it's not just the average middle of the road 50-50 forecast, but rather looks at those once per decade type of heat and cold events in understanding risk, and really brings together the industry's emerging issues as well. So we encourage you to read the report, and I'll provide some overview of the high points here in this presentation. So I'm going to talk about the two kind of key components in our assessment. We've assessed the risk of supply shortfalls over the next 10-year horizon by looking at those projections that we brought in and performing with the industry support some analysis of the risk of shortfalls. We'll also look at how generator retirements could shape that, and the trend continues as it has in past years of really high rates of retirements of the fossil fleet. And we see what that does over the next 10 years to drive the need for new resources and to drive the need for our reliability planners to really take a careful look at whether extending generators beyond their expected retirements is needed. So that's two components of our assessment of shortfall risk. And then I'll get into these three trends here, some of the trends that really shaping that risk environment. It is coming through loud and clear in our assessment work and many other places how demand growth is really taking off for a variety of reasons, adding to a stress that we've seen in resource adequacy over the past several years of the resource mix changing. So demand growth and the change of the resource mix is a kind of a combination for an adequacy challenge that is certainly growing and shows up in our report. Another trend we're going to look at is our new resource additions and at the pace that they're coming in at, and then transmission development, which is important because it provides that backbone of delivering from the generators to where the loads are, and things are changing. So we'll dive into each one of these, and again, as Wardo mentioned, you can type questions in the chat, and we'll field those. We'll have time for that at the end. So I'm going to talk initially here about the results of our assessment and how the method that goes into it. We found in the 2024 long-term assessment that the energy risks are increasing rapidly here over the next 5 years and extending throughout the 10-year horizon that we examine. And it all boils down and comes down into this risk map here, which shows each of our assessment areas and where they fall out in our risk categories of high, elevated, or normal risk, and also when the risk is first emerging in that horizon that we look at. Our risk map is divided by these risk categories, and I'll just at a very high level say that the red areas are ones where we project that a electricity supply shortfall could occur in normal peak conditions. And I'll show the criteria for how we determine that here in a minute. The elevated risk areas in orange are meeting their adequacy criteria and should have sufficient supplies when resources perform normally and normal summer and winter peaks occur. But more extreme conditions that we look at could lead, or we see that there's a likelihood for shortfall under those conditions. And then the areas that are in blue here are expected to have sufficient supplies over a range of conditions. The inputs that we take in to make this assessment, what we've done with the industry's projections of demand and resources is use really two methods to look for risk. The probabilistic assessment is an all hours energy look. So essentially looking at 2 study years, 2026 and 2028, we're analyzing for all hours of the year in a variety of resource performance distributions, probabilistically determining risks of energy shortfalls. And because it's no longer sufficient to just plan to have enough resources for peak conditions, you really need to look for risk over the entirety of the year because the resource performance changes, and it's not just enough to make sure you have enough for the peak periods and expect everything will be fine all the other years. So probabilistic assessments are a way to look in detail at all hours and how the resources perform during these various times. A second input is planning reserve margins. Many people are familiar with these. It's essentially a margin above expected demand based on what you need for meeting reliability criteria. So planning reserve margins, we still look at those. They're still very useful in spotting adequacy trends and particularly in filling the gaps between assessment years of the Prob-A, probabilistic assessment. But there really aren't not enough information in a planning reserve margin to adequately find all the risks that could occur. We've used a new criteria this year for deciding what are high, elevated, and normal risk that's documented in this NERC and National Academies engineering report, and I'll go into that a little bit more in a subsequent slide, staying at a high level. So what's driving the risk? What are the problems what are the underlying causes that are leading to these risk categories? Well, no surprise, there are, excuse me, there we go. It's some of the old familiar challenges, but we're looking at them through a careful lens of the next 10 years. We see the demand growth really taking off is a contributing factor to higher shortfall risks in many of these areas, shown here and highlighted. Generator retirements sooner than replacements are in place is also a key challenge. And similar to that is the limited dispatchable generation issue. This is essentially noticed in our probabilistic assessments where shortfall risks are occurring because variability in wind and solar is leading to shortages where there isn't enough gas-fired or baseload generation to be able to cover for those variations and shortfalls are occurring. So kind of at a high level, our report describes the general drivers for the risk in our risk map. So we'll talk a little more on these in a minute, and I'm going to show you kind of a detailed analysis on one area in particular to help understand how we do the assessment. First, to look at that risk criteria, this is essentially summarizing what we've used from our NERC and National Academies criteria white paper that is currently published. We've developed a more robust risk criteria than simply looking at reference margin levels and planning reserves because it's too easy to miss shortfalls events looking just at planning reserves. The criteria additions that are key here are these load loss and unserved energy metrics that you'll see here. Annualized load loss hours that exceed 2.4 hours per year is essentially a proxy for saying that you're projecting load loss that would exceed one event per 10 years criteria, which has been a long-standing resource adequacy criteria in the industry. The unserved energy metric is a similar type of issue where you're essentially quantifying how much energy is not being served in a future system because the supply is not there to meet the projections of demand. So we've characterized a high-risk area as one that exceeds certain loss of load hour and unserved energy criteria, and that criteria was set on somewhat of an alignment with established resource adequacy criteria and expectations for a reliable system. An elevated risk criteria is one that is meeting its resource adequacy criteria, but it has some noticeable amounts of unserved energy or load loss in the system that indicate that under more extreme conditions than your average summer and winter normal peaks, you're at risk of a shortfall, and that's how we've come to our elevated risk. Again, these are evolutions beyond the planning reserve margins. It's really reflects how critical electricity is in our society. Loss of load events are really challenging for our infrastructure and our societies. And also it reflects that the changing resource mix means we need to measure adequacy under a broad range of conditions and over the entire hours of the year, not just at our peak times. So that's enough of the kind of the details on the criteria, and I'd be happy to take any questions on that. But I wanted to give kind of a practical example of how the long-term reliability assessment considers a risk area. And in this case, we're going to look at Texas. This is some of the indices, metrics, and graphics in the LTRA that convey how we've assessed the ERCOT system over the next 10 years. Essentially, we can see through our probabilistic assessment that there is an increasing risk of energy shortfalls in ERCOT as their demand grows and their resource mix is not able to keep up with some of those projections of future demand. The probabilistic assessment table at the top gives some expected unserved energy numbers and loss of load hours. And what you can take away from those is kind of highlighted in the gold box here. You can see that the trend has increased from the last time we did the probabilistic assessments, where we have more expected unserved energy and loss of load hours compared to our prior year's work. And then you can also note that there is a trend of improvement between 2026 and 2028 in the Prob A, which means they are taking action to address the risk, and steps are being taken to reduce those loss of load hours. There's a lot of details in the report of how they're going about addressing that risk, but that's essentially how the probabilistic assessment is applied. And because these numbers exceed our criteria for elevated risk, that's why they're categorized accordingly. Also in the report, you'll see some graphical depictions of what's happening with their load and resources to help understand what the risk is, because that really determines how you solve this problem. And what we've seen in the ERCOT analysis is that they have load loss events in their future years projecting in both summer and winter. It's more likely for their load loss to occur in summer. We can see that through some of the different outputs of the probabilistic assessment. And that's a challenge that must be addressed. Essentially, this chart on the left is showing the evening hour periods around 9, 10 o'clock at night where expected unserved energy is emerging under different scenarios. Largely, it amounts to the solar resources are dropping off at that time, and the ability to meet demand in those periods is really dependent on whether wind resources are available, and if not, you could have expected unserved energy because the dispatchable generation is essentially all tapped out. They're getting all the thermal generation out of the system that they can. So adequacy planners need to address these shorter, summertime after the sunset risk periods in addressing some of their risk. But really, the challenge in Texas is winter reliability. The chart on the right shows an output from the same probabilistic analysis and what a typical risk day would look like in 2026. And the risk period extends over a long period from, say, late afternoon through the early hours of the morning. And it's really, this long duration period is a result of extreme cold temperature scenarios over a long period of time that essentially lead to potential fuel issues, generator weatherization problems, and high outage rates to generators that result in just insufficient generation for the extreme winter demands that can occur in ERCOT. So these are energy risks that we can see in our probabilistic assessment. This is really important for our long-term reliability assessment. We've got information like this for all of the assessment areas, and it just illustrates the adequacy challenge in one area categorized as a elevated risk over the next 10 years.
Hey, Mark, before we leave ERCOT,
Yeah.
We did have a question from the group. Is the situation in ERCOT aggravated by the fact that ISO is isolated from the rest of the U.S. grid?
That's a great question. There is in a little bit later in this presentation, we're going to talk about our transmission study that we did that found that ERCOTs could benefit from stronger ties to the eastern or the western interconnection under some scenarios, and extreme cold temperatures were one of those scenarios. So yes, if they had the kind of transmission network and the future system were developed in a certain way, it could help alleviate some of these challenges.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've looked at our risk map of a high, elevated, and normal risk, and kind of walked through some of the assessment results. I want to talk about an additional analysis that we did on the risk of generator retirements in aggravating the shortfall risk and leading to the needs for more resource development. We consider we consider all known generator retirements in the previous analysis that I've shown. So when generators have notified the ISO RTO that they are planning to retire, then those generators are factored in. They are taken out of our analysis, and they, basically the shortfall risk considers that generation resource is not there. The issue is there are many generators at risk of retirement or considering retirement that have yet to enter those processes and therefore are not factored into our risk analysis. So we did a special analysis with the LTRA this year to look at what happens if all of the announced generator retirements, these are generators, these are the generators that have started down the paths of retiring, have intent to retire, or have notified through some mechanism they plan to retire, but they have yet to enter those ISO RTO processes. What would that do? And we found that almost every assessment area would be falling short of their reserve margins within the 10-year horizon and need to make up for those resources going away. The amount of retirements we're talking about here, we consider over 115 gigawatts of total retirements were done in this retirement scenario. 78 gigawatts are already confirmed for retirement. Most of those are coal-fired generators. Those are already baked into the analysis before, on the slides before, but the additional 37 gigawatts of announced retirements are almost exclusively all coal-fired generation, and would really be leading to this need to be making up resources across the bulk power system. The chart on the left shows our different assessment areas and the amount of generation that was included in our retirement scenarios. So the dark blue bars are those confirmed, already in process retirements. The additional announced retirements are shown in the light blue bars here. And you can see several of the market areas like MISO and PJM are particularly at risk of these retirements. And frankly, they're already areas that are on our on our risk map for having risk of supply shortfalls. So clearly, additional generator retirements could expedite the need for more generation, but also lead to exacerbating those supply shortfall risks that we've analyzed previously in the LTRA. So I'm going to start talking about some of the trends and in the assessment that are driving some of these adequacy challenges. We've really seen a large leap, big leap in the peak demand projections compared to prior years. Looking back just a couple of years, we had 6% growth projected, which was considered to be big because the past decade of long-term reliability assessments, peak demand was really not growing substantially. But look now, this year was a big leap over last year's LTRA, and we see, just looking out over 10 years, demand projections increasing to a 17% or a 17% total increase, which is the largest we've seen in over 2 decades. As we get ready to do the 2025 LTRA, we're already putting our data requests out, and we expect more of the same. The demand growth is going to be even higher. So certainly, this is one of the leading challenges to resource adequacy is keeping up with this significant shift in demand trend that we're seeing over the last couple of years. I think you're familiar with the drivers, but we've put this risk map or this map together to show kind of what the drivers are across the bulk power system by surveying our industry participants in the LTRA process. It's data centers, of course, getting just a tremendous amount of attention. Industrialization of the economy, industrialization in manufacturing is also playing a big part in many areas, as is the electrification of various things like transportation and heating systems. So significant drivers for demand growth, and something we'll be working again as we get the 2025 LTRA ready. Something we'll be again monitoring and trying to quantify as much as we can. One of the significant takeaways from this demand growth, really when you get beyond the aggregate and look at some of the details, is the winter growth is outpacing the summer by quite a bit of quite a good amount, and this is significant. The drivers here, why is this happening? Well, it can be that the electrification trend is heavily affecting winter more so than summer. Heating systems, as they electrify, are putting more and more of that load into winter months, driving up winter peak demands, and those aren't having the same effect in summer, where essentially air conditioning continues to be added, but the pace of change is a lot slower there. Another factor is the solar resources that are on the distribution side, which tend to subtract from load on the distribution. So the bulk power system has a little bit less load to serve in the summer because rooftop solar is eating away at some of that peak demand. So lower summer demand is flattening while winter is really taking off. The solar power in winter is not helping with peak demand because peak demand in winter generally happens in hours of darkness. In 10 of the 14 areas that we would call summer peaking, the winter demand growth is exceeding the summer growth, which tells us we are headed towards a time when you could see winter demand overtake summer demand as the peak season in more areas, or areas become dual peaking. This is significant. We try to highlight this to our resource planners because you really increasingly need to focus on meeting adequacy in winter. And that means looking at how the resources perform in winter and the fuel capabilities of your resource mix in winter, and the generators and the load forecast. So it's not a minor detail. This is a big issue that needs focus with the resource planners.
That's good. And Mark, one other question from the audience on this thing. Does changing demographics, or I would even add to that, work from home kind of things, is that also influencing these changes in the demand growth patterns?
I think it is somewhat. There was a really interest in looking at that during the pandemic, and I think what was observed was largely it did have some changes on the load shape in terms of what residential use hours were happening. Typically a pattern of early electricity early in the day, basically hourly changes, seemed to be a kind of a flattening. But it was, I think, also seen that the industrial load or the commercial building load didn't really go away as some thought it might. So I think there is some of that influencing it, but it's really, I think the bigger players right now are the data centers and the projections for data centers, which have different hourly load behaviors. And maybe the work from home has been more muted because of some of the big movers in other categories.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, another trend I want to share with you is the new resources coming into the system, and this, I think, was something that took us a little bit by surprise last year. In that it showed up in the numbers that resources continue to come into the queue to connect, but they're not coming out of the queue as fast as the industry had projected. The resources in the queue, we call that the queue. They're trying to connect to the system. They're going through ISO RTO processes, and on the left you can see what our resource mix looks like in the queue for a good subset of the queue. That is the tier 1 and tier 2 resources, which are working their way through. And tier 1 is closer to being done. They have a signed interconnection agreement, where tier 2 is still processing. That resource mix is shown in the chart on the left. We've seen really the batteries increase significantly in this. But compared to last year, it continues to be really a largely solar-dominated interconnection queue, with batteries growing a lot as well. Overall, the growth is about 12% bigger compared to last year in terms of the number or the megawatts of projects trying to connect. But on the right, you can see just one resource type, for example, and that's solar. They're actually coming out a lot slower than what the industry had projected. What this is showing, and I think the interesting point here was that last year's LTRA projected a certain amount of solar would be connected by the time summer rolled around. And what we saw when we got another year's LTRA data in was significantly less connected than what the industry had projected, to the tune of about 14 gigawatts less connecting than was projected to happen over the prior year. We saw this in wind as well, and some other resource types. And on the aggregate, fewer resources connected, or less megawatts were added than what the industry had projected. And that's a concern. That is really, I think, the narrative of demand is growing, generation, there's a lot of uncertainty around generator retirements. And now we are observing resources adding at a slower pace than what we had projected. All of that adds to the mounting concern of resource adequacy, and it leads to the risk map that we saw earlier, growing number of areas at risk of shortfall. Another trend, this is not a new trend, but really the natural gas continues to be eating up a larger and larger share of the resource mix. Natural gas is really a critical fuel for generation, as the older coal-fired plants are retiring, and there are not new coal-fired plants being built. We still have this tremendous need for baseload generation. We have a tremendous need in winter to meet all those cold, high demand periods where the sun is not shining. The reliance on the thermal fleet is huge. And so our reliance on natural gas for electricity generation continues to be really a large, significant component to electric reliability. The map here is showing the areas that have 35% or more percent of generation at peak coming from a natural gas source. So it's almost all of our bulk power system assessment areas. It tells us that as we plan for reliability, it's really not enough to just think about electricity generation, but we have to consider how that just-in-time fuel source of natural gas is going to be able to serve the generators' needs as we go into the future where the resource mix is changing in the ways that it is. Lastly, I wanted to talk about our transmission development trends. We collect information from our assessment areas on projects that they have in development, and for this year we noted a bright spot is that there are more transmission projects in planning processes. This is good news because transmission helps move not just power from the new resource supply areas to where the load is, but it also can help during reliability, help maintain reliability during wide area cold weather events. We can illustrate that through this transfer capability study that NERC performed as required. It was a regulatory study. It was required by the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2023 for NERC to perform an analysis that would look at how increased transfer capability and transmission development could help make a more resilient grid. I just want to hit some of the key takeaways is that NERC found that an additional 35 gigawatts of transfer capability in the US could help improve energy adequacy in extreme weather. So this is essentially meaning that risk map that we looked at the very beginning, some energy issues could be resolved if you increase transfer capability in between some neighboring areas. But I want to highlight this middle part here in the slide here, and this came through very clear in the assessment. Transmission alone does not resolve all of the supply shortfalls. You need to maintain sufficient generation resources in order to be able to have supply that can be transferred during these wide area events. So our recommendation was that planners consider all their options to address the system needs. And we made this clear with policymakers, I think, that you can't take this study and go decide where to build transmission. You really need to consider the complexities of building a system and consider whether local generation and storage or demand side management could also play a role, or how they fit into meeting energy needs during a range of conditions. So all that is I've gone through our assessment and our trends. The recommendations that we came up with are just kind of broadly speaking listed here, more details in the report. But we think it's really important in this era of demand growth that we see that we need to grow our system. That means carefully considering what generators are deactivating, generator plans for retirement. And there's a lot of mechanisms to do that. It's the integrated resource plans, the market mechanisms, and policymakers asking the questions of how their policies would affect generators. Second, we're improving our LTRA all the time. I talked about some of those energy metrics today. We've got a lot more that we're working on to be able to give our fullest accounting of energy risks that we can. Our third one here is the message to regulators and policymakers that we need to build. We need to build transmission. We need to be able to build generation and fuel infrastructure. And so siting and permitting challenges need to be tackled in order to make building something that we can do here in North America. The fourth one is about our gas and electric energy system that is evolving here. You can't think about that independently. It's important that we plan and operate the system to consider how gas and generation are affected together. And then the last one is really engineering type stuff, but I've done a lot of showing the megawatts for electricity supply and demand, but there's a whole nother level to reliability beyond that. We sometimes call it the essential reliability services of the grid, but it's what makes the grid fly. It's the frequency response. It's the inertia on the system to be able to withstand disturbances. And it is the careful engineering that goes into planning and the system effectively. And we need to make sure that our future resource planning, we need policymakers and regulators that listen to the utilities and the ISO RTOs and understand that it's not just a megawatt accounting that will tell us whether the system can be reliable or not. I know in the interest of time, I won't go into all these emerging issues that we discuss in the LTRA, and we really talk about these at a high level, but emerging issues are kind of all these other things that have the potential to affect generation in the future or operating challenges that the grid operators will face. And I don't think there's any surprise that data centers and large industrial load have special challenges, not just from an adequacy planning perspective, which I think you would be familiar with, but also for the way the grid operates with these different types of loads on there. So we discussed that some. Battery and energy storage systems have emerged and quickly been built onto the system, but they operate differently than a traditional generator. And so there's a lot to tackle there to ensure that these are providing the reliability benefits that people expect them to be able to do. Electric vehicles and load is an interesting development. It's as the infrastructure is building out and more of these are on the system, it has the charging behaviors of vehicles can influence not just load shapes, but also how the grid would respond in operating times of disturbance. And so we discussed that here, but importantly, I think to all of these is that NERC and industry partners are coming together in technical groups to understand the risk, survey each other, to see how these risks are developing and come to terms with best practices that can help manage the risk and understand what needs to be done in the future to ensure that the risks developing here can be managed. And I'll just say the fourth one on energy drought is something that for resource planners to consider. It's the name that is being given to a phenomenon when two variable resource types like wind and solar are at low levels for an extended period of time, like many hours or many days at a time. And as data is collected on the performance of wind and solar, researchers are seeing these patterns where you can't treat them independently for low resource conditions. That wind and solar at times have low output together because of some driving factors underneath there. So resource planning needs to consider these unique challenges to variable resources, or to supply from variable resources. And that's our overview of the LTRA. I just wanted to highlight, we published our winter reliability assessment in November, and going into the winter, we were concerned that reliability would be threatened under the types of cold weather events that we are seeing today and have seen a couple times here in January. These extreme winter conditions have a number of familiar challenges. The demand can really spike. Generators can struggle to perform as they're expected, and then the natural gas supply system can get stressed. So our assessment noted that a significant amount of the grid was at risk during extreme conditions, but resources were adequate for a normal winter. So I think as the winter has unfolded, we've certainly seen many instances of extreme conditions on the grid, and I really salute the grid operators, the generator operators, and owners for ensuring the system has stayed reliable throughout the season. Our risk map going into the winter looked like this. Again, the issues were demand growth, gas supply risks. A few areas were seeing low capacity reserves, so their demand had grown faster than their resources were growing. And then areas like SPP, MISO, and ERCOT, where there's a lot of wind generation on the system, the combination of normal or above normal demand and low wind output was a concern for risk for winter reliability. Again, we've seen great performance out of the grid. There have been adequacy challenges for several weeks through the winter. The most recent one, the January 19th through 24th polar vortex, was I think the height that we've seen so far anyway of winter challenges. And recently NERC and FERC have announced that they will do a detailed review of grid performance during that period. This is a review that will help us understand what went well, because by many yardsticks, the grid performed well and the fuel system performed well. And it's important that we understand what's being done right, so we can reinforce those and make the best practices well known and help prepare for future winters. I know generator outages have been kept to a minimum, and fuel supplies have been good. And I'll say going into the winter, we typically survey all of our generators about their fuel availability, and I'll note that the coal supplies were really in good shape going into the winter, and we had no significant concerns being raised by the industry of their ability to get coal delivered ahead of the winter. So that's the type of thing that we look at in the winter assessment, is the availability coal and other fuels for reliability. So here we go. One more cold snap. Hopefully it's just one more, but the things that were done to prepare for winter and the performance of the operators have really been key to getting us through this winter without major incidents. With that, I've given you a lot to digest, I'm sure, but I appreciate the chance to be here. Again, we really see the challenges on the grid from demand growth and resource uncertainty as being the sort of thing that we want to get the attention of regulators and policymakers, resource planners, to be able to digest those and focus on these, because this system is critical, critical to 400 million North Americans, and it will not stay reliable without concerted effort. So with that, I'll take any questions that we may have, Wardo.
That's great, Mark. Outstanding presentation. Thank you so much for all that detail. I know our group appreciates it. We got time for a couple of questions. Feel free to type them in the chat box, or you can raise your handy thingy. I've got a couple of questions too. One question that did come in the chat box was, how does NERC assess reliability impacts with the uncertainty surrounding environmental regulations? Remember, you're talking about coal people,
Yeah.
so we've got a lot of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good question. So I talked through the generator retirements projections that we used going into the assessment. From time to time, NERC has done special analysis of how environmental regulations could affect the future generation mix. We did not do that for this long-term reliability assessment, and we haven't done it the last several assessments. So we're really relying on the lagging indicator of generator announced retirements to be the mechanism for looking at additional generator retirement risk. Not to say that that's where we have to be limited to. I think NERC leadership and other stakeholders have frequently talked about doing special analysis for how environmental regulations and other factors would affect future generation and developing scenarios around that. So there's nothing specific in the works right now. I know there's a lot of uncertainty right now in regulation and policy anyway, but I would not be surprised if there's more talk at NERC's leadership about whether it's time to work with a consultant or another group to develop some special scenarios around retirement risk from regulations.
Interesting. And I guess another question I had, which is sort of the flip side of the question on your demand projections, the data center thing, not a day goes by without another data center announcement thing. Do you factor in, do you expect all of those data centers to get built, or are we have some irrational exuberance going on now, or?
Right. That also is kind of the emerging issue around uncertainty of load. As we get ready to get the 2025 LTRA, we're developing the kind of questions and input mechanisms that'll help us try to understand that uncertainty better. We don't have a good sense for it right now. It hasn't been the kind of thing we were talking about over past years of declining load growth. But it really is an issue. The uncertainty around load forecasting and the data center projections is something that does need to be looked at, because we have anecdotal evidence that would make you think some of these projections aren't as firm. And then there's the other perspective of there's more encouragement going on now policy-wise for data center growth. So we're really we have quite a bit of uncertainty to try to wrestle with here.
Yes. You guys crunch a lot of numbers and run a lot of scenarios. I'm just curious, are you starting to use AI yourselves in some of this analysis?
Good question. NERC is really not using a lot of AI in the we're not using it in the LTRA analysis. But I think there is talk here, just like other places, of what are the right applications that would help us and provide benefit. So good. I think the future, we'll see what the future holds, but currently it's not being used for the assessment.
Great. Well, our time's about up here. We like to begin on time and end on time in this group. So if any of y'all do have additional questions, feel free to shoot them over to me. We can follow up with Mark offline. Mark, thank you so much. This was incredibly informative. I know our group got a lot out of it, and we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. So
it was my pleasure. Thanks for all you do, and thanks for keeping us warm this winter.
All right. Thank you so much, Mark. And thanks everybody for attending this week. So take care.